From our first days in school, we learned to put pen to paper. It's a habit we develop through constant use, until it's second nature, something you don't even think about. And now that we've had enough time to practice, one company has decided to harness the most powerful force known to man, the force of habit. Introducing PenPoint from Go Corporation.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'd like to welcome you all here to the Go Developer Summit. And judging from the response that we got to our invitations, this may become known as the Woodstock of pen-based computing. I also learned this morning that this is John Hancock's birthday today. The promise of the pen is simplicity, a single, familiar tool for data entry and commands. With a pen, you can manipulate information directly where you see it. The pen can free a user from the complexities of learning the keyboard, the mice, cursors, function keys, numeric keypads, etc. And properly employed, as you will see shortly, they can even simplify file systems and networks. But to deliver this simplicity, a new operating system is needed. You see, the pen is not just another input device, this year's add-on for the computer enthusiast. Bolting a pen onto a system designed for a keyboard makes it more complex to use, not simpler. We had to take a fresh approach, a pen-centric approach, to simplify computing. Now, introducing a new operating system is really a process. It's not a product shipment. And we began that process last July when we announced our licensing arrangement with IBM. And today, we continue this process by announcing the availability of the PenPoint Developers Release. Let me introduce Robert Carr, the Vice President of Software Development and co-founder of Go. Robert?
Thank you very much, Jerry. It's really a pleasure to be able to share a product with you today that we've worked quite a while on. Of course, it's called PenPoint. We started 3.5 years ago to design and build it. And the result is PenPoint, the first general-purpose operating system designed expressly for the unique needs of the mobile pen-based market. In my demonstration, I'll walk you through a number of aspects of PenPoint. They can be clustered together really in 5 major sets of features. And I'll give you a preview of those 5 major sets. The first is NUI, or Notebook User Interface. This is the main organizing user interface for PenPoint. It consists of the notebook metaphor, along with powerful support for handwriting recognition and gesture control. The second is EDA, or Embedded Document Architecture, which is a PenPoint innovation that allows users to freely mix documents together as building blocks in seamless compound documents, and also to create hyperlinks that allow them to reference information from within documents pointing to other documents. The third is support for mobile connectivity. Some people talk about whether or not there's a need for a new standard or to reuse existing standards. The point about mobile computers is they don't need to communicate just with themselves. The important point is that they must communicate with a plethora of existing desktop computers and existing networking standards. And we've designed PenPoint from the get-go to build in support to hook up to these existing standards. And we'll be demonstrating that this morning here and more this afternoon. We've built in detachable networking, deferred I/O, and instant on-off support. Mobile computers require a very compact system, one that can scale down to fit whatever size the computer is. Because today's computers may be yay size, but soon they'll be very, very small, able to fit in your shirt pockets or into StenoPad sizes. So PenPoint is compact and scalable, enabling a market with many hardware companies delivering PenPoint computers in a variety of sizes and feature sets. Lastly, if a major new market is going to be born, it needs a solid foundation. We don't want to go changing a lot of the underpinnings just another 2 or 3 years from now. So PenPoint is an industrial strength operating system, a rich foundation that can last throughout the 1990s and beyond. And I'll be sharing some of the features that make that point as well. I'll turn now to the main organizing screen of PenPoint, which is called the table of contents. But first, I want to make a comment about the software that you'll be seeing me operate here today. This software is the actual shipping version of PenPoint that we'll be shipping in the developer's release in another few weeks. It's gone through our recent QA process. It's basically beta level quality, but this is a full functioning operating system, and you'll see quite a few applications running on top of it. This is a stable and relatively mature system that's been under development for about 3.5 years with close to 100 man-years of effort into it. So this is certainly no prototype or no simulation. I'd like to give you a tour of the main elements of PenPoint's table of contents. I'll point with this red pointer right on the screen up here. At the very top, in the top right corner, is the page number 1. The notebook metaphor consists of a sequence of pages. Each page can either be a user document or a section. Here in the main area of the screen, you can see the actual contents. This is a document. The bold-faced sections contain other documents and sections in turn. To the right of the documents and sections are page numbers. You can turn to any page by simply touching on that page number. Down the right-hand side of the screen are tabs. These tabs can be created by the user with any name they like, and they can be attached to any page or section. They're in essence a form of hot or frequent access. Touching on the tab will instantly turn to the referenced information. Lastly, at the bottom of the screen here is an area that we call the bookshelf. It's a set of icons that represent system-wide resources, such as the help icon on the left, and over on the right, the out box that contains your transfer operations. In my demonstration, I'll be using some of the PenPoint pilot hardware that Go has produced. This is a unit just like the one that's resting in the podium that I'll be using. This unit has a cover that can be opened up, and it's operated with a pen, which I have in my pocket. It's a wireless pen. It's a special pen that can be sensed by a grid behind the screen. You just simply write directly on the screen, and the computer senses your ink, and the software takes the appropriate action. This particular unit is diskless, and it's lightweight enough so that it can be easily carried around with a mobile worker all day long. If we could turn on the overhead camera now, I'll explain how you'll be able to follow all of my interactions with PenPoint. This camera is focused on the podium right here. And of course, you can see my hand there with pen, and so that you can follow the actual interactions of the pen on the screen. The point of the pen acts as the user's reference point on the screen. With the pen, there is no need for cursors, removing one of the learning impediments that blocks a lot of users from operating computers. The pen is a direct control device. So we've set up this camera so you can follow along. Simultaneously, the two screens on the sides project the actual full PenPoint screen image. Now, we've got this camera focused in on about 1/2 of the PenPoint screen so that you can see the ink fairly close up. And I'll be shifting the unit up and down occasionally so you can follow along. And I'll try to always remember to shift so you can watch my actions whenever it's essential. I hope you'll bear with me. It takes a lot of shifting around sometimes to jump down to the bottom, but I think it'll work out fine. So let's start controlling the software of the pen, and so you can get a tour of PenPoint. The pen acts as an excellent pointing device. I'll come up here to this menu command called View, and I'll just tap with the pen, and it pulls down a menu. And I can give an actual command in the menu by tapping again with the PenPoint. That command was the expand command, and it's fully expanded the table of contents, so we can see all of the pages in this notebook. But besides a pointing device, the pen's real power lays in its ability to issue gesture commands. Because you can draw very accurately with the pen, you can actually draw out commands right where you want them to act. So gesture commands collapse into one step, the act of selecting something that you want to operate on, and the act of specifying the command that you want to apply to it. I'll give you an example right now of the first one of 11 basic gestures that PenPoint builds in consistently across all PenPoint applications. This basic gesture is the delete gesture. To delete something in PenPoint, you could select it and then go to a menu to issue the command in case you needed to find that command, but most users strongly prefer the gesture, which is a simple X. You draw an X over whatever you'd like to delete. So I'll come to this document right here. It's labeled memo:"Fabro." If I just draw an X right over it, PenPoint will delete it. In this case, because deleting a document is a serious operation, PenPoint puts up a confirming dialog, and I'll cancel out of it. But the point of the pen is that because strong gesture support's built into this system, I'm able to focus on the work that I'm actually performing, in this case, speaking to an audience. And just a quick look down and a quick gesture will issue whatever command or operation I want. This computer and this operating system were designed to support people who don't focus all of their attention on the desktop computer. I'll introduce the second basic gesture that I'll be showing you today now. It's the scroll gesture, or flick as we like to call it. It's the command that you use to scroll information up and down or left and right in a window on the screen. I'll use it to move further down through this table of contents so we can see some more of the information that's displayed. The flick gesture is based on the model that you're just shoving a piece of paper, moving it back and forth with your fingertip or perhaps with an eraser. So to move information up in the screen, I'll come to this line, work in progress, and I just draw a quick flick up, and it's moved to the top of the screen. And again, I can just give another flick command, and we'll scroll further through this table of contents. I'll do it once more, and you can see we're now down at the bottom. This particular notebook contains 62 pages. I'll return to the top of the table of contents with a double flick. Jumps to the home. No home and end keys, just flick and double flick. This particular notebook I'm operating today is loaded with documents that are representative of a typical PenPoint user. He's a commercial real estate property appraiser. He works for a large insurance company, and he spends his day in the field looking at properties and meeting with clients. He uses his PenPoint computer for a variety of tasks involving both vertical and horizontal applications. He uses it to draft memos and letters, to send and receive faxes, to fill out forms, to upload and download data, and to keep track of his personal calendar and information. I'd now like to turn to the first of a number of sample applications that will give you the flavor of more of how PenPoint's used to organize the user's information and gesture support. This first sample application is a form. It's down here on page 14. It's called Appraisal Form, and I'll turn to it by simply touching on the number 14 there. PenPoint turns the page with a graphics wipe effect, and it will display the destination document. This form was developed with a PenApps development tool that Slate Corporation is announcing and demonstrating this morning. It's a good example of the graphically rich applications that can be built on top of PenPoint. The first point about interacting with forms that I want to stress is that handwriting recognition and character entry is just a portion of the kinds of data and interaction that people in the field need to do and will do with pen-based computers. You'll see in this form that I'll enter some fields, enter some alpha data into some fields, but I'll also capture a variety of other forms of data using other means. I'll begin by entering in the policy number into this form up here. There's a combed field to the right, and I'll write the policy number. Now you notice that PenPoint in the form translates the policy number, and in fact the next two fields have now been automatically filled out by this electronic form, freeing me of the need to enter the data and ensuring higher accuracy. Obviously, this form has a set of data records that it's been downloaded from the corporate database. Now, this policyholder field, actually my clients corrected me. The name of their company has been changed from World Enterprises to World Enterprises, Inc. And I'd like to show you another basic PenPoint gesture, the correction gesture, which allows you to correct any text. To correct text, you simply draw a small circle over it. PenPoint pops up what we call an edit pad or character box editing pad up here, and you can see the text has been spread out in combs, making it very easy to correct by overriding individual characters. In this case, I'll overwrite the blanks at the end with the words Inc. period. PenPoint translates them into place, and I'll touch OK to close the pad back down. Let's go through the form and add some more data. I'll come down to the location field, and I'll just write California here. Now you notice that there's no need to navigate a cursor to the field. With the pen, the point acts as your pointing device, and you're able to use the excellent hand-eye coordination that we're all endowed with to actually quickly move in a random order through the form. Let's come down to the type field. Here's a good example of entering data with no handwriting recognition whatsoever. It's a pop-up picked list. I'll touch in the field, and I'll indicate that it's an office building, in this case, by touching on that. And here we have some check-off boxes. This is a commercial property, so I'll check there. The pen is an inherently, I guess, multimedia input device, really, in some ways, because not only can you enter alphanumeric and fixed choice lists, but you can also capture ink as a data type, if you will. So here, if we come to the sketch of the lot, you'll see a good example of the kind of data that many people today capture on paper-based forms and that they'll need to continue to capture in pen-based forms. So I'll draw, I'm not a very good artist here, but I'll draw a rough sketch, perhaps of the location of this building on its lot there, and the sketch is sunk or accepted into that field. Lastly, down at the bottom of the screen, you see a field here called Inspector's Signature. PenPoint builds in a standard signature object, and I'll come here and scroll my signature into that field as well. Now, one of the wonderful things about paper, of course, is that it's so entirely free format. You can always break out of the pre-printed fields or whatever and do any kind of doodling or annotation that you like. Well, PenPoint builds in support for ink as a data type, and Slate's done an excellent job in this PenApps product of giving the end user and the application developer access to that. So here, I'll come up, I guess I didn't let you follow, I've come up here to the top and pull down a menu, and I'll set on an option called Markup. This form now is in a markup mode in which I can annotate any fields. Perhaps the customer has requested that we consider changing the replacement rate from 5 up to a higher rate. So I'll make an annotation here, higher rate, and later on tonight, when I return to my office as a property appraiser, I might now step back through my forms, and wherever I have some annotations like this, I could then deal with them then before I finally upload the data to the corporate database. So we've seen some examples of how rich forms can be underneath PenPoint. I'd now like to turn to a very different kind of application. To do so, I'll come up here to this top right corner where there's a tab. It's labeled Contents. It's attached to that table of contents in the first page of the notebook. Table of contents is frequently turned to by the user as an easy navigational or control center. Users can reorder their notebook, control the number of pages and sections they have here, and of course they can turn here to then find any other location that they want to go to. In this case, I'll be going to this document down here labeled Drawing Paper. So I'll touch on page 16 and we'll be turned to that. This application is a simple object-oriented drawing application. It allows the user to create circles, squares, rectangles, lines, and the like. Its real difference, however, lies in its user interface, which has been rethought for the pen. You'll notice that there's no palette of icons in this drawing program. Instead, if you want to create a shape, you simply sketch it out or draw it. So I'll come here and I'll draw a circle or ellipse. And this application recognizes it as a command or gesture command to create an ellipse object. So I have the directness of the pen in creating this object, but I have the power in the computer in adjusting it or editing it. For instance, I'll grab a resize corner, and you can see that this is a graphic object that can be edited now. If I sketch out a rectangle of some kind, it's recognized as a command to create a rectangular object, which I could then adjust the line thicknesses or fill patterns. I can also sketch out approximately straight lines, and they'll come out as straight line objects. It was an earlier version that had the bug where the straight line objects were skewed. Freeform curves are also supported. These come out as a sequence of Bezier curves, which then can be edited by touching on handles and deforming them, as I'll do here on the screen. I'll take a moment now to describe the underlying graphic subsystem in PenPoint that this application and all PenPoint applications are drawing on. The underlying graphic subsystem is called ImagePoint. It's a very compact but very powerful graphics and display subsystem. It's similar to Display PostScript in concept in that it unifies text along with all other graphic elements. And in fact, in this drawing program, you can also add new text objects to it, which I'll do now by coming here and writing the word simple. Gimple. Now, handwriting recognition, of course, is never perfect, and so we've paid a lot of attention at correction and editing of handwriting translation. So before I demonstrate more about ImagePoint, I'll use that same correction gesture that you saw me use before. I'll come to Gimple here, and I'll draw a circle right over it, which will bring up those same edit pads. And so to change that G to an S, I simply write an S right over it, and then I can touch the OK button to close it down. Now back to ImagePoint and the graphic subsystem in PenPoint. PenPoint builds in powerful outline font technology that allows it to render text at any point size on demand from the user or the application. So I'll grab the resize handle on that text label simple, And I'll size the text to be very large, and you see the result that PenPoint in this application produced for the user. I'm currently at page 16, which you can see in the top right corner. I'd like to turn from this page to the next page. So I'll do so by coming up here and touching on the arrow that points to the next page. This next page contains the same drawing program, but it has some data already loaded into it. PenPoint will be used to edit existing data as frequently as it is to create new documents or data. And in this case, you can see a floor plan that this property appraiser has with them that perhaps they're trying to keep up to date with some proposed layouts for an office. Let's make some simple edits to bring this floor plan up to spec with what the client really wants. Let's come to the circular table and delete it. You saw me use that same X gesture back in the table of contents to delete a document there. I'll draw an X right over this round table, and that deletes that object from the image. Let's replace it with a small rectangular table. And I'd now like to introduce two more basic PenPoint gestures, two more of the 11. Copy and move. To copy an object in PenPoint, you just tap and then pause for a moment, and then you have a small icon that you can drag. And so I've just dragged a copy of this table up to there into that other area of the lobby. Now let's select this table again, and we'll move it by pressing with a pen tip, and let's place it in front of those chairs. You'll notice that this user interface in this drawing program is very modeless and very seamless, fairly intuitive. The manner in which PenPoint and its applications manage to deliver this user interface is that they work together to interpret all of the meaning of the pen. This user interface has been rewritten from a fairly low level to really match the potential of the pen. And it's a modeless interface as a result. Let me show you three different circles and three different meanings, each of which is a very natural meaning I think you'll see. First, you've already seen that if I draw on a blank area of the paper, for instance, draw a circle, it comes out as a circle object. I've also shown you that if I circle a text label, such as Libby, the edit pads come up. And thirdly, if I overwrite this I with an O to correct Libby to lobby, it comes out as the letter O. So the same shape three times, three circles, but three very different meanings. And that's because the applications and PenPoint together are looking at the pen's activity, and the applications are able to control its meaning. This is something that you could never do with an emulation layer or a pen compatibility box in which applications are unchanged, because only applications can know what the true meaning of the pen activity should be on a particular region of their screen. I'll touch OK to close this pad down. I'll now touch on the Contents tab again to return to the table of contents and find another document. The document I'll turn to is called Draft of Letter. Here, it's a little bit lower on the screen. It's right here. Now, besides touching on the page numbers, I can also touch on the icon next to a document, which I just did, and we'll turn to page, I think it was 19, Draft of Letter. This particular document is a letter that this property appraiser is working on. This letter is inside of a text editor that comes with PenPoint. The text editor is called MiniText. It's a nice pen-oriented, multiple font-capable text editor. Let me show you some basic gestures in operation under this application. Let's come here to the second line where the word expert occurs. If I want to delete that, I think you'll remember that a simple X is how you delete in PenPoint. Now, PenPoint builds in, and its applications do also, basically all commands are built into menus and pop-up option sheets or dialogues so that the user can always find commands and discover them. Because that's one characteristic of gestures, is that you can't necessarily guess what they are until you know them. But most frequently used commands have gesture equivalents, and most users find that they quickly prefer the gesture equivalents. And many of these gesture equivalents can be seen as accelerators. Let me show you a few accelerators. The first is another form of deletion, in which I could delete several words in a fell swoop, if you will, by striking them out or crossing them out. These words right here, I'll delete them by just drawing back and forth through them or scratching them out. Very direct, and of course it calls on our collective unconscious of markup commands that we would use with red ink on printed paper. I'll come to the edit menu here and touch on it, and then touch on the undo command, which is a PenPoint user interface standard that works consistently across all applications. And the text that I deleted has been recalled. Let me show you a few additional accelerator commands. You can adjust the fonts and faces of all this text through a variety of means, but one very nice fashion is using a few gesture commands such as the letter B. If I draw a capital B over a word, that'll boldface that word. If I draw a letter U over a word, that'll underline it. Now, if you want to have your gesture act on more than a single word, you need simply select an extent of text first, and then your commands will operate on the extent. So if I tap on a letter here, that selects an individual character. A double tap, of course, for most of you GUI users, will select the word. Now, I can extend the selection with a gesture that's called the square bracket. If I draw a square bracket out here to the right, say on the word building, that'll extend the selection to the right. And similarly, I can extend selections backwards by drawing a square bracket to the left of the selection. I'll just give you a couple examples here. So it's very easy to quickly adjust your selection to any extent, and then if you give a command, it'll act on the entire range of selected text or whatever other objects you're selecting in, say, a spreadsheet or other PenPoint application. Well, so I've given you a flavor of some simple editing commands, but there's one thing that's still missing in this text editor demonstration. I haven't added any new text. Let's do that. I think you can guess that the gesture for adding new text is a caret or insertion caret. I'll come down here to this line where it says does not seem consistent, and I'll add the word vary by just drawing a quick little caret on the word consistent and a small writing pad that pops up. Now you'll notice that this writing pad doesn't have boxes. It's just a ruled line. PenPoint's handwriting support and its user interface gives the user the choice of what style of handwriting entry they prefer. They can choose a ruled line or character boxes or a mixture of both, and you'll see that I prefer a mixture of both. They can also choose the size of these user interface elements because people's handwriting varies in size. So I'll come here to this line and I'll write the word vary. Now I'm pretty excited about demonstrating PenPoint, so my handwriting's a little shaky, but we'll see how PenPoint does on this. I'll press OK, and you notice that I said I prefer a combination of the boxes in the ruled line. Here you see that combination. PenPoint first displays the translation in these character boxes so that if there was an error, I could easily correct it. If there's none at all, and I'll touch on OK to close this down. Let's add a few more examples of text into this. We'll come up here to this word historic, and I'll draw a caret on it. And I'll change that text to say opinion on the venerable and historic. So I'll write venerable and. Now you'll notice that I've run out of room to write the second word, but that's no problem because writing pads in PenPoint are always resizable. So I just grab the resize corner and I'll write the word and here to the right. And I'll touch on OK to see the translated text. Came through just fine, so I'll press an OK again to enter it. And since I was inserting it into a boldface word, of course, the new text picked up the boldface attributes. Let's insert an entire sentence down here on the screen. I'll select a position there, and I'll come into the Insert menu to ask PenPoint to create an inline embedded writing pad. When the user is entering just a few words, they'll draw a simple caret to get the pop-up writing pads. But if they're inserting a larger amount of text, they'll choose an inline embedded pad. PenPoint responds by spreading the text apart so you can see the surrounding context. And I'll write a new sentence here, something along the lines of, his work is usually so predictable. With an exclamation mark at the end. Now first, a few points about my handwriting. You'll notice I was much better at math in school. You'll notice that I used a mixture of uppercase and lowercase, and I've used some punctuation. PenPoint's handwriting recognition allows free mixture of upper lowercase, numerics, punctuation. It's set up for real-world data entry, real-world English language. You'll also notice that I needn't separate my characters completely into boxes, and that I've used cursive forms of certain characters, a cursive P and a cursive D, because that's the way I handprint. PenPoint comes with a generic set of recognition prototypes or models for characters, and the user can just use the computer with those, or you can go through a short training session of perhaps 45 minutes in which you write a number of sample sentences, and PenPoint will look at those, and if you write any of your characters in a different shape than PenPoint already knows about, it'll modify to match those. Now, I haven't trained this particular handwriting system, but I'll press on OK, and we'll see what PenPoint comes up with here. His work is usually so predictable. Now, of course, this comes out perfectly every time I do it outside of the podium, but I'll show you some correction techniques here. The first point to point out is you'll notice a couple big question marks here. These are, in essence, PenPoint's way of crying uncle. Namely, it couldn't come up with a good suggestion for that character, and so put these in there to call my attention to the fact that this character needed correction. Now, I'll overwrite I'll delete this letter A here with another basic gesture, which is the pigtail gesture to correct. So I'll just draw a quick pigtail through there, and that'll delete that. I'll rewrite that capital H, which obviously I had slanted together at the top to get the capital A, and I'll overwrite the question mark with an S. Now, his work is usually so predictable, my U's in usually you can see are probably a character that PenPoint would adapt to or train if I always wrote in a nervous fashion on the podium. So I'll overwrite the U here again, and PenPoint will bring the word around to the right spelling. Now, the final error here is simply that the exclamation mark, according to our usage, of course, is spread out by an extraneous space from the word predictable. I probably spaced it a little bit to the right of that word, and PenPoint's set up to try and steer words into being separated. So again, that pigtail will delete that. I'll press on OK to empty this text into the application, in this case the text editor, and the pad stays in place, because frequently when you're adding a large amount of text to a letter or a memo, you'd be writing sentences in succession. But I'll close this pad by touching on Cancel. And so here's the new sentence that I've added. Now let's say that I've changed my mind about the placement of this sentence. If I triple tap on the sentence, that'll select it. And I'll now show you that same move command I used in the draw program. I'll show it here. I'll drag that sentence up into the previous paragraph. So if I just pause with a pen tip, we get a moving marquee or icon, and I'll place the sentence up into the middle of the previous paragraph. Now you notice how easy it is to directly manipulate or really cut and paste and edit your document using the pen and PenPoint's user interface. Let's complete this letter by adding a signature at the bottom. I'll come up into the Insert menu and choose Signature Pad. Now, the Signature Pad is a built-in PenPoint object, and it preserves my signature, or Karen's signature in this case, at the full 250 points per inch that this pen technology is able to sense. The result is that even though the signature is a bit grainy on this LCD screen, the signature will look beautiful when it's laser printed out or faxed directly out of this machine. This portion of my demonstration concludes talking about the notebook user interface, or NUI. Now, the key elements of the notebook user interface is the notebook metaphor, in which the user's data is organized as a sequence of documents or pages in the notebook. You'll notice that I never had to give program launch commands or file load or file save commands. Instead, I've simply moved from my information back and forth using the flexible tabs and table of contents and page turns that PenPoint gives me. The notebook user interface also provides the applications and the user with powerful handwriting recognition and gesture control. The next major feature I'll demonstrate is EDA, or Embedded Document Architecture. The next page of this notebook, from the next page beyond 19, here I'll shift the screen down again. The next page is, of course, page 20, he says. Again, I was good at math. I'm going to turn from this page. I could use that arrow, but I'll simply use that same flick gesture to kind of turn the page. And so we'll go to this page, and it's a later version of the same letter we've been working on. Now you notice in this letter, we have the same text editor, but in the middle of the text, right after this paragraph of text, we have what appears to be another program. And in fact, it is another program. It's that same drawing program we've been using. I, as the author of this letter, want to include an architectural drawing or rendering because the purpose of this letter is asking a colleague about their advice about a particular architect's style. Now, PenPoint's embedded document architecture is very unique in its ability to actually let the user embed live applications inside of each other. This image down here, under other operating systems, would be a dead graphic image that the user would have cut and pasted into this document, or, under certain proposals, the user would have established some links and established separate files and have to manage the linking relationships to get the data in here. Under PenPoint in a minute, I'll show you how easy it is to create this compound document, but first let me show you that both the text editor and the drawing are live. For instance, in the text editor, I can give some of the same commands I've given before, such as the X to delete, or scratch out through a few words. And you'll notice that as the text shrinks in size, loses a line, the graphic image or embedded drawing shifted up. And now here in the drawing, I'll add some more final details. In this case, a few circular elements underneath the roof line. Now, embedded documents can have their borders and document frame turned on or off. Of course, this embedded drawing has its document frame turned on. You know, I'm able to pull menus down. I can see the title line up here. But it's easy to turn off the document frame, and I'll do that now by drawing a capital B on the title line. That's an accelerator command to toggle the borders off. The result is a seamless compound document, but both the text editor and the drawing program are still live. And I'll demonstrate that now by using the copy command we've already used, but this time I use the copy command to copy information from the text editor down into the drawing program. I'll come up to this word Mockwell. A double tap selects the word, a square bracket to the right will include the question mark, and now I'll give the copy command, a tap and a pause, and it gives me that double marching marquee. Now you can copy and move information inside of PenPoint inside of a single document or across application boundaries and pages in the notebook. In this case, I'll go from the text editor down into the drawing program, and it's as simple as drag and drop. Now, what did it take to create a compound document in which I had two fairly powerful applications co-residing in a single image on the screen and, of course, at printout time as well? Let's scroll further in this document. I'll give a flick gesture to shove information up on the screen, and I'll give it again so that we really can get positioned down at the end of the document. What I'd like to do is to create another drawing down towards the end of this letter. First, I'll open up some additional space, and I'll call up PenPoint's Create Menu or Stationery menu, which lists the installed applications and their stationery templates. I'll choose Drawing Paper by touching on it, and that'll create another drawing program right in between these two lines of the text editor. Now, embedded documents can be closed or open, and this embedded drawing program is closed by default, and it appears as a small icon or button. Simple touch on that will open it up. And you'll see that the text is shifted down below. I'll resize this drawing program by grabbing the resize handle, and I'll make it a bit smaller. And I'll just show again that it's live and running by creating a few graphic images, a few shapes or what have you in there. Now, to get it in the same shape as the other drawing, I can pull down the grid menu and touch the off command to turn off the snap to grid, and that same B on the title line will toggle off the borders. The command wasn't recognized, and so there was a small pond effect, and so I'll draw the letter B again here, and this time it toggles the borders off. So the embedded document architecture allows users and application developers to use applications as building blocks. My own background is as an application developer, and what I've seen occur through the 80s is that the industry has been forced really into the kind of a corner, and that corner is large monolithic applications. You see application after application adding more features and functionality really that usually belong to other applications. You see a presentation graphics application adding drawing programs and spell checking to itself because they have no choice but to build that right in. And the programs get larger and larger, the development schedules get longer and longer. Well, because of PenPoint's embedded document architecture, applications can be mixed and matched fluidly by users and application developers. And so we're trying to cut that Gordian knot and speed application development. The other key feature of the embedded document architecture is a hyperlinking capability. I'll turn to the next page to demonstrate that to you. This next page contains a comparables report. It's a database printout that this property appraiser has carried with him. It's a listing of buildings and property values and some other information. And of course, this appraiser could scroll through it with flick gestures. But down here at the bottom of the screen, and I'll shift the unit up so you can follow. Down here at the bottom of the comparables report document is an area that has some buttons. These are hyperlink buttons that the user had previously created. They're in an area that PenPoint calls the cork margin. It's just a little stuff buffer down at the bottom of every document frame. And I'll touch on this hospitals button. These buttons have been set up to point right into this document as a form of bookmarks. And you'll notice that what happened, again, I'll shift so you can follow. He says, the podium's a little bit sticky and sometimes it's a little hard to shift. So maybe I'll give up and not shift. There we go. You'll notice that what PenPoint has done once that hospitals button was pressed was it found that region of the document, highlighted it, and scrolled it into view. Now, hyperlinks are built right into the operating system, so they work not only within a document, but across multiple documents. And I'll show you how you'd create a hyperlink in PenPoint that would reference from another document back into this comparables report. So let's come down to the word factories. We'll select it, and then we'll turn to the previous document, that letter that we were working on. When you create a hyperlink, it creates a button object embedded right inside of the host application, and it points to whatever your current selection is. In this case, I selected that word factories, and it was on the next page. So here we are back in the document, and I'll simply create the hyperlink down here at the bottom. And what's created is a button. It's by default gets the label of the destination, but you could edit the label. In this case, I'll just touch on that button, and you'll see that PenPoint turns us to the reference document and scrolls that location into view. So you can think of hyperlinks as a form of customized paths that users can lay over the structure of the notebook metaphor for frequently referenced information. That concludes embedded document architecture. Let's talk about mobile connectivity. PenPoint builds in strong support for mobile connectivity. I'll return to the table of contents. PenPoint's support for mobile connectivity includes detachable networking, which means that PenPoint supports the user plugging and unplugging networking connections as frequently as they like. Existing desktop operating systems tend to require the user to reboot the operating system before they can install a new network protocol set of software or plug and unplug the connections. That's unsuitable for mobile users. PenPoint also builds in support for something called deferred input-output or deferred I/O. This is the notion that the user, when they're working throughout the day in the field, should be free to issue print commands, send email commands, or fax commands whenever they like, even if there isn't a suitable connection or printer available right then. You can imagine that when you finish writing a memo to John, that's when you'd like to give your command, say, send it as email or send it as a fax, and have it out of your mind and have the computer perform the clerical work of storing it in some kind of outbox, if you will, and to have the computer perform the work of determining when a connection is available and then sending it on out. And that's exactly what PenPoint does in deferred I/O. Lastly, PenPoint builds in support for instant on, so that throughout the day you can know that within a second or two you'll have access to your PenPoint applications and information. I'll turn to page 13 here. On this page is a fax application, and a fax that I've received in this computer earlier on. This fax application is being developed by Go, and in combination with a fax modem, allows any PenPoint document, any page in the notebook, to be sent out as a fax. And of course, you can receive faxes. Here's a fax that I've received. The Pen is a superior markup or editing tool for faxes. Typically what folks do with a fax is oftentimes they'll mark it up and want to retransmit it. So here, to mark up, there's no user interface to learn. You simply start overwriting. I'll change the address from Brandon Street to Bryant Street. And I'll change the property owner. Now you could never do this kind of markup with a laptop or notebook computer. Now the benefit of a fax application in this device, of marking up faxes with a computer, is that if you need to retransmit it, you won't have a fax of a fax syndrome. There's no secondary scanning step. This is the original image of the fax with my ink merged into it that'll be retransmitted out. Furthermore, I could edit this ink, and of course I can pan and zoom over this fax as well. PenPoint builds in a standard send user interface. It's another one of our standard commands. And the send user interface works across any installed email or fax applications. And it's the send user interface that really implements the outgoing side of what we call that deferred I/O feature. And down here in the bottom right-hand corner is the outbox. This is where, if I gave a fax command now on this page or any other page, this is where the fax would be placed to be pending. And then when I plugged in a phone line, it would empty out of that outbox later on. The fax is a good example of how PenPoint provides support for telecommunications-based field tie-ins for mobile users. But we also need to provide strong support for getting access to existing desktop computers, existing file systems, existing networks. And I'd like to demonstrate that now. I'll return to the table of contents. And what I'd like to do is to go get some desktop data. and edit it in this PenPoint computer. Up here on the stage, over on the side there, we have a couple computers, Apple Macintosh and an IBM PC compatible. They're hooked up to my PenPoint computer on the podium with a networking cable. And what I'll demonstrate is the simplicity with which a PenPoint user can gain access to existing data and operate on it. I'll come down here to the bookshelf area, and I'll touch on the disks icon. This will open up something we call our disk browser. And you'll notice that it's displaying two icons for a PC and a Macintosh. That happens to be the only two published volumes or published computers on the small network we have here. And I'll touch on the PC icon to view the information that's stored on its hard disk. Now, there's a couple things you should notice about this networking connectivity. This is not a mere file transfer utility I'm running. This is a true networking connection. If these PCs were connected to a network with file servers and printers, all the resources of that network would be available to my PenPoint computer through these PCs. I'll come down to this file, sales meeting, and I'll bring it into PenPoint by using the same copy command, and I'll drag and drop it right up here towards the top of the table of contents. Now, PenPoint builds in strong support for import and export of data. And here we've seen PenPoint pop up a standard user interface confirming which PenPoint application that's installed I want this foreign file to come into. And I'll confirm that it should come into the PenPoint mini text editor. Now, the file I'm bringing in is a standard MS-DOS file with text with a lot of rich formatting applied to it. And it's already been brought in, and it's displayed in the table of contents now as just another PenPoint document. Let's close down the disk browser by touching on the close corner, and let's turn to that document that I just brought in. I'll touch on page 4. And this particular document has a variety of different font faces and sizes, and you'll see that all that information has been preserved. And it's now a live PenPoint document, which I could edit. I'll come down here and scratch out a few words. And once I was done with my editing, if I wanted to, I could easily store this file back on the PC or the Macintosh in a native file format for those applications to use. So we've just been seeing some of the aspects of PenPoint's built-in support for mobile connectivity. And it's important to point out that PenPoint's designed to hook up to multiple existing computer systems. For instance, PenPoint's file system is chameleon-like, and it extends itself to read and write native file systems of whichever type are installed. For instance, PenPoint's default installed file system is actually the MS-DOS FAT file system, and that's the file format that PenPoint uses on floppy disks. The next aspect of PenPoint I'll talk through is the fact that PenPoint is a compact and scalable system. PenPoint is compact in 3 key ways. First of all, it was a system that we designed for mobility, and we were able to leave out extraneous functionality and only include the features and functions necessary for this new market, and that's helped keep the system small. Secondly, PenPoint does not assume that a disk is present. Now, many small pen-based computers will have disks built into them, but many also will not, especially your smaller sized devices, because semiconductor densities are so high that you can carry around a lot of information in a semiconductor-only machine. And PenPoint does not assume that there's a disk there, and therefore PenPoint does not insist on keeping a second copy of code and data on disk, and that dramatically reduces total system requirements. Lastly, PenPoint is small and compact because it achieves a very high degree of code sharing. Now, what do I mean by code sharing? This leads me to the word object-oriented. PenPoint is an object-oriented operating system. And I'll turn to this page, or slide really, on page 9, and I'd like to talk through the object-oriented character of PenPoint. By object-oriented, I mean that PenPoint's functionality, its programming interfaces, are all expressed as classes and objects that applications can send messages to. And what this basically means to the application developer is they can inherit PenPoint functionality and behavior, and if they ever need to, they can modify it, because sometimes things aren't quite right, and they need to shift the functionality a little bit to really meet their needs. And it means that they're really able to get a lot more out of the operating system. Now, a key aspect of PenPoint's object orientation is that the structure of the application itself in PenPoint is defined by what we call the application framework. The application framework is 2 things. First, it's a blueprint for the rules and structure of every PenPoint application. There's no getting around it. Under PenPoint, you have to adhere to the application framework. Now, the second thing the application framework is, and this is the real payoff, is it's a complete default implementation of a PenPoint application. And this slide lists a wide variety of application behaviors that are pretty much fully implemented underneath PenPoint that you as an application developer needn't recode or reinvent from scratch. Instead, you can focus on what makes your application unique, your special functionality. Now, I said PenPoint is compact and scalable, and let's talk about scalability. The key aspect of scalability is twofold. First of all, PenPoint's scalable to run on a variety of computer architectures, really. We run on memory-only or RAM-only machines, but also machines that have two-tier memory structures with disk-based or secondary storage and main memory. But perhaps snazziest, our scalability also applies to screen size. Let's talk about pens and paper. If you go into a stationery store, of course, you see that paper pads are sold in a wide variety of sizes. That's because the pen scales up and down very nicely. Contrast this with a keyboard. Keyboards don't scale very well. Everybody wants a full typewriter-sized keyboard. No larger, and typically no smaller. Most of the market wants a typewriter-sized one. And that limits the size to which keyboard-based computers can be shrunken. But everybody oftentimes will buy pads of paper that fit in your shirt pocket. And pen-based computers can and will scale down to those very small screen sizes. But that presented us at Go with a difficult technical challenge. Our vision for PenPoint is that it will allow a single application binary to run unchanged on a wide range of PenPoint computers, from small shirt pocket-sized devices to steno pad, up to notebook or page-sized devices, even large wall-mounted screens. Now, application developers under traditional operating systems specify the position of their user interface elements with XY coordinates. They pretty much hardwire the position of many user interface elements. And that's going to leave them a little bit high and dry when the screen size is dramatically different or the aspect ratio is different because the user has just rotated the unit on the screen. Well, in PenPoint, we built in support in the user interface for something we call automatic layout. And I'll demonstrate it to you now, and then I'll explain what it is as PenPoint's adjusting. Now, what I want to do is to change. I've brought up a system-wide preferences here, and I'll change to a different aspect of the preferences, the fonts and layout. I'm going to rescale or resize PenPoint's system font. Here you can see that the current system font is 12 points, and I'll change from 12 up to 18. Now I'll hit apply and close, and notice that the small size of the current font on the screen is adjusted to go all the way from the current small size to a much larger font size. What PenPoint's doing is all application user interfaces are described in relative terms, not absolute positions. And now when the screen size changes, or in this case when the font size changes, PenPoint's able to relay out all user interface elements. And that's what it's just done to accommodate the new size. And so here we see that the menus, for instance, reflect the new font size as well. So PenPoint's compact and scalable. The last and fifth major feature in PenPoint is the fact that it's a rich operating system for the 1990s. It's a 32-bit operating system, as Jerry described, which means it can address 4 gigabytes of memory. It uses hardware memory protection to provide a robust environment so that no one application can take the system down. And lastly, it's a preemptive operating system. It's preemptive multitasking, similar to OS/2 in that regard, meaning that PenPoint is able to carefully control where the processor's time is being spent. And I'd like to demonstrate that now by bringing up a simple game called Mazes. Now this Mazes game is I brought up the wrong screen here. I brought up preferences again, so I'll close that down. What I meant to touch on down at the bottom was the tools icon. This Mazes game is a simple pen game, the goal of which is to trace your way through the maze. I'll open the maze game by touching on it in the tool palette here. Now, this is a good test of dexterity and persistence, and you trace your way through the maze. Now, I've been known for my persistence, but never my patience at Go. And I also believe in using computers to automate tedious tasks. So this game builds in an auto-solve mode. 386 hardware will be faster. Okay, that's enough for the fun. Now, with this maze game that's still in auto-solve mode, the system is still completely responsive to the user because this game has a lower priority in the preemptive multitasking system. So down here on the table of contents, if I want to turn to page 19, I can touch on it, and you notice that the maze game will temporarily be stalled while I, the user in the foreground, are getting the priority of the system. So that's a simple example of the preemptive multitasking in the system. It gives smooth user response in terms of handwriting recognition, background communications, and fun games. I've really covered all the 5 major elements in PenPoint, and I'd like to conclude with demonstrating one very simple application. And this application makes a point about designing software for the pen. If there's one point I want all of you as developers to understand, it's the excitement and the invention that's in front of all of us in terms of this new market and this new tool, the pen. And this application is a good lesson, I think. When we first implemented a 4-function calculator about a year ago, we implemented a calculator that looked like a calculator. It had buttons on the screen, and you tapped the buttons with a pen, just as you would under the Macintosh or Windows. Well, we quickly realized that that missed the point. So let me open up the Tools palette again, and I'll open up this application or accessory called Math Paper. And I think it'll make the point. Math Paper, you'll notice, doesn't look like a picture of calculator. Instead, it looks something like paper. There's these ruled lines. You don't punch buttons with a pen tip. You just write your equation out. The point of the pen is rethinking user interfaces to push computerization into new terrain with new users, a simpler to use system. So that really concludes my demonstration, and there's one last point to make, and that's that this system I've been showing you today is a large system. It's involved a lot of work from many people, many of the most talented hardware and software engineers in Silicon Valley, and they're all here today. And although I'm the person who has the privilege of demonstrating for the first time PenPoint in a public fashion, they're the team that gets the credit for the product. Thank you very much.
The possibilities for PenPoint are both awesome and exciting. From pocket-sized time managers to wall-sized computers. Possibly even the first real home computer that everyone can use, because it makes use of habits we all share. All these systems could be designed to make our lives easier and to make work take less time. It all comes back to one central idea. When something is both natural and powerful, it's a force to be reckoned with. And that's what PenPoint is all about. Harnessing the force of habit.